Really? I know a lot of people named Angel. I know a lot of people named Angel that are Mexican.
Oh, my last name.
Oh, I know. I don't know how to Angel,
My
man.
last name isn't that common. Like, it's not Lopez.
Lopez, there's probably millions of those.
Or Gonzalez.
Rodriguez.
Martinez.
Get out of the way.
Lopez, I know.
Villafañe.
Are you actually going to?
Yeah.
When?
Okay. Hey, Jimmy, stop talking.
I pointed out last week, part of the culture war, a student prohibited from speaking in class, expressing his views about marriage between two people of the same sex. The professor said this is a settled issue, that you can't debate this, okay? Which really is evidence of this dictatorship of relativism. The people claim to be tolerant and want tolerance, but they're the most intolerant if you oppose their position. That's Marquette. That's the Jesuit university. My alma mater, Loyola, I just got this a few days ago. They're going to host their 8th annual drag show, where students dress up in drag.
What's drag?
Well, drag means the opposite sex. Okay.
Oh, like
Yeah.
gender bender? Like gender
Yeah,
bender?
yeah.
They have
They have a drag show, and
That's stormy again.
and this is what the Loyola University advocate says, one of their mouthpieces. Loyola is considered one of the most diverse, welcoming, progressive Jesuit Catholic universities in the nation. Students of other colleges and universities admire our school for its acceptance of everyone, especially queer individuals. Prospective students are attracted to this campus because of the work that LGBTQ and ally students and advocate and our partner social justice student organizations do. And I would just imagine that if someone were to voice their opinion in opposition to something like this, they may be treated the same as the student from Marquette who voiced the church's teaching on this. Another thing on the culture war, just to show you how this is snowballing, you can say. The rector of the cathedral in Phoenix last week was giving a homily to a group gathered there celebrating freedom, defending freedom, okay, and our religious freedom. They had a conference there with peers. And he talked about how the possibility of his going to jail, and I've said this too, I've said this from the pulpit, the possibility of my going to jail if certain people get into power who don't like what you're saying. And he cited the recent subpoena of, I don't know if you've seen this, 5 Texas pastors, their sermons, because they were openly, they were criticizing the so-called gay agenda, putting forth the biblical teaching on homosexual activity and what marriage is in God's eyes. And well, it just so happens that the mayor, the openly homosexual mayor of Houston, Anise Parker, she subpoenaed the sermons of these pastors, and also of any other materials that they had, subpoenaing them. As if for example, if the mayor of Kenosha didn't like one of my homilies, and serves me with subpoena saying you have to turn over all your homilies, all your work, your writings on your computer, and I would direct him to what I'm saying here in class too, because this would be evidence held against me. I could be, according to the thinking of some, be under investigation and charged with hate speech. The article here says that a mayor in East Parker was trying to suppress opposition to the city's ordinance that allows access to public facilities, including restrooms, without regard to gender, the so-called bathroom bill, as it's called. I guess they're trying to be progressive in Houston and allowing people of the opposite sex to go into bathrooms that are not their sex. And, well, she withdrew the subpoena after the public was outraged at this. What are you doing? But these folks have an agenda, and I just want to make you aware of that, because things aren't going to get better, in my opinion. They are going to get worse. And I will keep saying what I'm saying, regardless of threats or subpoenas or whatever that may come my way. I don't think this is going to happen in the near future, at least in Wisconsin, but you move to other parts of the country, and in other countries, actually, there have been, I don't think priests, but Protestant pastors who have spoken up, and they've been in jail because of this. I made reference last year to a bishop in Spain who gave a homily outlining a number of sins, and he included homosexual sodomy as one of them. And he was called before the European Human Rights Commission for hate speech. So you can include other sins, but not homosexual sodomy. That's excluded because this is regarded as politically incorrect, and you must be tolerant of us, but we will not be tolerant of you if you speak out against us. That's the whole point. That's the dictatorship of relativism. It becomes a dictatorship, okay? And that's what we're facing. So you have to be armed intellectually. We're at war, and the war is going to heat up. If you don't realize it, wake up and smell the gunpowder. That's what I like to say to my folks in the parish and to the students, okay? On a different topic, we'll change now. What did you think of the film on the Shroud?
That was really good, actually.
Yeah, I think it's the best. It was actually made more than 10 years ago, but I think it compiles all the best information on the Shroud. There's even some new information on it. But I have here, well, here is the actual face of Christ. So it's a little rippled because it's old, but that's the actual face of Christ from the Shroud. I visited the National Shroud of Turin Center in Colorado Springs, Colorado, about maybe a dozen years ago. Dr. I think it's Paul Jackson, who was the member of the team in '78 who went there and examined the Shroud. He has a full-blown image, a life-size image of the Shroud. The Shroud is actually like 14 feet long, if you understand that, because it was wrapped over Jesus' body, folded over. It wasn't wrapped like this. So that is why you'll see the Shroud hold up here. This is Christ's front side, okay, and this is his back side because it's wrapped over him. And this is the photographic positive. This is the negative, which the negative shows up better. That's what I think the film began with, that photo that this photographer took, and was amazed that the negative shows up as a positive, just the way it's been done. Yes, Jim?
So could we infer the height of Jesus?
Oh yes, yeah.
So what would that be?
I think he's close to 6 feet. I think he was about six foot. If my recollection serves me.
Would that
Yeah.
be tall for the time?
It would be kind of tall, I think so, yes. there's so many things about the shroud that reflect its authenticity. I promised that I would share a story with you after I answer her question. I'll share a story.
I'm sorry, I don't know if they said at the beginning of the movie or whatever, but shoot, what was it? Oh, who found it, or like how did it like come up? Like, did they just like discover it, or who brought it forward, and how they find it?
Well, that was part of the film. Maybe you missed the end of it.
Oh, yeah,
They
you
were
missed the
traveled
end.
from
Missed the end.
city to city and ended up in Turin, you see. But one of the strong pieces of evidence that would have been impossible to make up, I mean, if someone were trying to perpetrate a fraud, is the heavy amount of pollen on the shroud from plants that are only found around Jerusalem. Did you see that?
Yeah, you said that. I
Okay.
just meant like who
Yeah.
brought it forward.
Well,
It was killed that king, and then it got moved.
yeah, it went to Edessa, and then it ended up traveling through various circuits, ends up in Turin, okay, in the, I think, the 14th century or thereabouts. And I'll share a story with you. I was with a couple of priests on vacation in Wyoming about, this goes back about 15 years ago. And Father Reese was with me. By the way, keep Father Reese in your prayers. He just got a visa, and he's getting his plane ticket. He's going to be leaving for India to undergo stem cell therapy, to take stem cells out of his femur, I believe it is, out of the bone marrow. They're going to take stem cells out. They culture them, then they inject them into his spine, his neck, and one other place. And they're hoping that this will help him, bring back his, he'd like to have his speech back, the ability once again to eat. Anyway, just keep him in your prayers that things go smoothly for him, making all his arrangements. We were praying for, he needed a visa, and he had to come through quickly. I called Congressman Paul Ryan's office, and he put in the call for him, got him a visa with his two travel companions. He's got one going out and one coming back because he can't travel himself. He's too weak. So just pray for him that the therapy does him some good. But he and I, about 15 years ago, were on vacation in the summer in Wyoming, and with still another priest, Father Glenn Fontana. And we kind of were doing different things one day. Father Reese likes to hike. I like to hike a little bit. I also like to fish. I was fishing in a mountain lake trying to catch some trout. And he was off hiking. We said we would meet back in a place, at a certain time, like 2 in the afternoon. And so I got there first. My fishing didn't produce any fish, unfortunately. And I was waiting for Father Reese, and there was a guy who was fishing, a fly fisherman, who was walking to the parking lot, and I just struck up a conversation with him. And I said, did you catch anything? That's what fishermen always say when they're out fishing. Did you catch anything? He said, no. And I said, neither did I. We started chatting, and we were both sitting down on the bench. I think he was waiting for a ride himself. Someone dropped him off. The third priest we were with was going to pick Father Reese and I up. So I'm waiting for Father Reese and the priest to pick us up, and I start chatting with this fella. And he then shares with me what he does for a living. He says, I do tests at the university, I think it was Arizona. He says, I work in carbon-14 testing, dating. And I said, really? He said, oh. I said, well, there's the Shroud of Turin. They dated that a few years ago, and with the carbon-14, and there's controversy about that. And he said, I was on the team that tested one of the parts. I think it was the University of Arizona or Reno, I forget where it was right now, somewhere out west. It was one of the sites where they got a piece of the shroud, an edge of it, and they did the carbon-14 test, along with 2 other sites in other places in the world. And I said, oh, really? I said, what did you think? He says, it's a fraud. And I said, well, as a man of science, which he was, I said, you can say that your results did not show the shroud being 2,000 years old. That's really all you can say scientifically. I said, to say it's a fraud is making just, you're injecting your own opinion. He says, no, it's a fraud. And I said, well, again, as you know, all that science can show is that your test showed that this didn't date to the time of Christ. Okay? He kept insisting it was a fraud. And I said, well, you know, I mean, granted, you're an expert in your field, but, and I had been aware of the evidence that you saw in the film, that there had been questions about the dating. Did you get to that part about the, okay, well, see, the dating has been thrown out now. They realized that the dating was bad because the samples that they took were problematic from a carbon-14 testing point of view. Okay? So they realized that carbon-14 test is no good anymore. But I said to him also, I said, well, you know, there's questions about the test because of the sample that was used. And I said, but there's also a lot of other evidence that tends toward its authenticity. I said, you know, there's the pollen on the shroud that's only from the area of the Holy Land, you know, high concentrations, especially of thorn plants near his head. And I said, then you have the eyes. Did you see that? The coins on the eyes. Did you get to that part? Okay. Now, Father Fides, the Jesuit priest he was from Loyola in Chicago, when I was growing up, every Good Friday he had a show from 12 o'clock until 3 o'clock. He was one of the experts on the shroud. He's the one who discovered the coins on the eyes of Christ, and that this was a practice amongst the ancients to place coins on people's eyes after they were dead. And those coins were dated to the time of Pontius Pilate, this makes it authentic. And I was sharing this with this fellow, and he kept saying, no, it's a fraud, it's a fraud, it's a fraud. And I thought, well, you know, I can't convince him. Well, just then Father Reese walks out. And so we start sharing more information about the shroud and, you know, how a lot of evidence points to its authenticity. He keeps insisting that it's a fraud. He just will not let go of this position. And then at this time, our friend pulls up in the car, and I get up and I said, well, you know, I'm not going to convince you otherwise. And Father Reese, I think, was about to belt the guy because he was just very, very insulting and bad-mannered, you know, with his view towards the shroud. We thought, just because of his name and the way he looked, that he may have been Jewish. Okay, so we thought there may be some motive behind his someone who's a Jew would tend to not want to admit the authenticity of the shroud. Anyway,
save the whole argument.
well, not really. I mean, you know, if you were open-minded, okay, but I don't think he was. That was the point. I think he just had an agenda, and he kept insisting that this was a fraud, which I kept insisting to him. You can't say that as a scientist. You can say, my study didn't show a dating to the time of Christ, but you can't say it's a fraud. That's not a scientific statement. That's a statement of opinion. But he kept saying it. Anyway, the shroud is interesting because it reveals so much to us about Christ's suffering, especially if you look at the negative and see on the back. Okay, this is the back side. I'll turn it over. Okay, here. If you're looking at Christ's backside, the number of scourge marks on his back, his legs, his arms, really horrendous. See, under the Jewish law, you were allowed 40 lashes, and usually you stopped at 39 in case you lost count to make sure you didn't violate the law. But Christ was not scourged by the Jewish authorities. He was scourged by the Roman soldiers. So, how many of you have seen The Passion of the Christ? Anyone seen that by Mel Gibson? Okay.
That one.
I think that is an accurate depiction of the brutality the scourging, because the ends of the flagrum were, sharp pieces of bone or metal, which would eventually be tearing the skin. And that's what the shroud shows, that the skin was just, Jesus was just a bloody mess. It was, his back was literally shredded, and even his front side, you can see here, from his arms and his front, it has marks on it. That's the blood, and it's really so fascinating, everything that one can detect from the shroud. But I put this up one day in church was talking to kids, and it was a group of altar boys actually, and finally one of them raised his hand. He said, "Well, was Jesus just this big?" I said, "No, this is a shrunken version of the original."
Door and sent them out.
But it is fascinating, the study of the shroud, and Dr. Jackson, whom I visited, out at the Shroud Center in Colorado Springs, he is, I think, the one who came up with the theory for the folds in the. So you have, there were burn marks because the shroud was in a fire. It was rescued from a fire. That's where the singe marks come from. But there are also folds in the shroud, and it was Dr. Jackson who just put forth a theory that it was folded in a certain way because they would show it. It appears in Edessa, just this part and a little more to people for public showings. And another thing that Dr. Jackson discovered, in addition to, and I don't know if it was on this film, I can't remember, in addition to the large singe marks here because it was in the fire, there are other burn marks that tend to be on the shroud in different places. Did they talk about that? I can't recall. Okay. And Dr. Jackson, he has a good theory on this, that the shroud was actually first used at Mass as the altar cloth. If you know what a priest uses when he's getting the altar ready, he takes out, what is it called, the piece of cloth that the priest places on the altar on which the chalice is placed. Do you know what that's called? Anyone? The priest takes out a piece of linen, piece of white cloth, places it on the altar.
I just thought it was a white cloth, okay.
Olivia Helwig, please come to the main office. Olivia Helwig, come to the main office.
It's called a corporal. And that goes back to the early church. Corporal from corpus, body. And we don't know the origin of that practice, but Dr. Jackson thinks it may have been from the shroud. The actual shroud was used as an altar cloth by the apostles, which would have been, just a practice of piety. And the incense that they would have used during the Mass, with the censer, that some of the charcoals may have fallen out and fallen on parts of the shroud and caused the other burn marks on the shroud. I think it sounds like a reasonable theory to me, because they don't have an explanation of how these smaller burn marks got on the shroud, the bigger ones because it was in a fire, but not those that are smaller. And the blood type on the shroud, did you get to that section? The blood type matches. I think it was one of the last questions. Maybe you didn't get there.
I didn't get there.
Okay,
Do the whole front. Isn't it like AB positive?
AB.
Isn't it like the universal blood type or whatever?
That's the universal receiver.
Well, it was consistent with the sudarium, the piece of cloth that we believe was placed around Christ's head, because there was a separate piece of cloth on his face that was setting aside, that we have too. The blood type from that is consistent with the blood type the shroud. And actually, another interesting thing is I showed the film on the miracle of San Lanciano to my class last year. I don't know if any of you were in my class who saw that, remembered it, okay? The miracle of San Lanciano, where both the host and the wine actually turn to flesh and blood during Mass. That's like an ongoing miracle. It's never these elements have never decomposed, and they tested the flesh that's in the pyx, and it's like living flesh from the heart. And they tested the blood. It hardened, but it still has all the properties of living blood. It's the same blood type as the shroud, which is fascinating. Okay. This miracle is in San Lanciano, Italy. I saw there were a few miracles of the host turned to flesh. There's one in Santarém, Portugal, the Church of St. Stephen. I offered Mass there. I have a photo of that because I saw it up close. The host actually turned to flesh. It's not hermetically sealed, okay, which is another miracle within the miracle. But there are these consistencies between these say miraculous events, and the shroud is really a living miracle. It's a living icon of Christ's suffering and death. You can study it. Question.
Didn't you say like how you said the blood is like hardened, but it still has all the properties? Isn't it like liquefy, like
Well,
what?
that's Saint Januarius's blood.
I don't know.
Who they collected his blood, and it liquefies on his feast day about 5 or 6 times during the year. It just turns to liquid, and they carry it around the church, and there's no explanation for it. It changes volume, it changes the weight. It's fascinating. But with the shroud, no. Those pieces have solidified, but they've been tested. They have all the properties of living blood, which is impossible. If you shed blood on the ground and you leave it for an hour, it loses all the properties of blood. And this blood has retained all its properties over. I think that miracle was in the 900s, about 900, with the Basilian monk, and it's in San Lanciano, Italy. I tried getting there a couple of times. I never was able to, but yes.
I was just going to ask you to use the bathroom, please.
About what?
Oh, the bathroom, please.
Oh, please, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
And this is a photo of the cloth that we believe may have been placed in Christ's. Actually, this is the one that was wrapped around his face and head, and this. Let me see. I have an article on it.
Is that the one with the hair off?
Yeah. Well, Veronica, right? Veronica's veil, you know. And this is a nice article. The Pope Benedict visited there some years ago. The return of Veronica's veil. This is the face that's on there, and this face actually matches the face on the shroud. I mean, facial structure, the nose, everything. It's almost a perfect match, and just more consistencies. This is it's called the Montepello, and it's in, let me see, a church in the province of Pescara, Italy. It's a very thin veil, and it shows Christ's countenance. Another thing about the shroud, I think, did you see that in the film with the images that have been painted? They did the examinations of showing how the facial images that have been painted of Christ over the years. You can always recognize Jesus when you see him in art, usually, okay? You say, oh, that's the face of Christ. Well, we think that this was the model used by by the artists. Okay, that's why you have this consistency. Did you see that part of the film where, okay, yeah, the fellow did the comparisons of the various artworks over the centuries. The very early ones, no, because they didn't have the shroud. But we think that from the early centuries, that Jesus' face was the model being used to paint Christ, and then everyone was using this model. And you always see the long nose, the different features of Christ, and the Pantocrator. Okay. I didn't bring my book with me. That's on the cover of my book on divine revelation. The Pantocrator, he's got the big eyes. And why did they paint Jesus with the big eyes? Well, it was because this is probably the model they were looking at. With it looks like big eyes because his eyes were closed, and they were taking this as the model for the Pantocrator, which became kind of a standard model for the face of Christ. And that's why you see this consistency throughout the ages. All these fascinating
He looks like he's like 60.
pieces.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Looks like he's 60.
Well, this is the face of someone who has suffered. I mean, it really reveals the suffering of him, and the crowning with the thorns, and you saw the Barry Schwartz. See, now he's a Jew who was one of the examiners. Barry Schwartz said, "I went and thought we were going to take a photo and then go home." He says, "I was amazed because what did their I forget the term used of the photography, the special photography, where
Yeah.
it appeared that it wasn't
Like it was raised, like it was.
right. It was
under-
raised, and I can't recall the name of the process that was used, but it was like a 3D image on the shroud. It's not just a painting. Because that's what this fella who was arguing with me saying was fraud. Well, someone just painted it. Well, no. They have no idea how this image got on the shroud. It's really a mystery to science. They investigated it. They can't figure it out. It's in the fibers itself. And that was part of the film too.
One of a 500th of
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
You know,
It's just
crazy.
a painting process couldn't have been used. No painting process that we know of anyway. And that's
Aliens.
And
no, not aliens. No, it's called the death of the God-man and his resurrection. That there was probably a great burst of light at his resurrection, which is what made that image on the shroud. And here's an article on Science Shines New Light on the Shroud of Turin's Age. Okay. Now, I said the carbon-14 dating has been thrown out because they realized the sample was not good, and it didn't give them an accurate reading. Okay. But here's an article. I'm trying to find out when this was. Okay. Ethnic Register. Okay, from May of 2000. Okay, May of 2013. Okay. A new approach to dating the Shroud of Turin has located it squarely in the time frame necessary for it to have wrapped the crucified body of Christ. By measuring the degradation of the cellulose in the linen fibers in the shroud, two separate approaches show the cloth is at least 2,000 years old. So this is science again supporting the faith and well, this is. We don't have to believe this, but this is something that's put forward for us, I think, for our belief. And this woman, she's Isabel Piszczek. She is a particle physicist and also a mural painter. She gave a presentation back when I was in Illinois about 15 years ago on the shroud, and she spoke of how it couldn't have been painted by any known process that we were aware of. And by the way the blood had flowed and is left on the shroud, we think, this is a depiction of it, that Jesus, his actual death, when he died, he was hanging like this. That's at least one theory, okay? from the way the blood stains are on the arm and on this arm. It's likely he would have died in that position. Okay. And you know that the nails wouldn't have been through the hands, probably. And that's what the shroud shows too. And if you look at the hands here, it looks like it's the wrist, you know, the base of the hand, because if they've tried it with cadavers, okay, putting nails through and the body will rip through. It just will not hold it up. Okay. The weight is too much. So you have to go through here and here. Dr. Pierre Barbet, if you want a good study on the pain that Christ underwent, Dr. Pierre Barbet, B-A-R-B-E-T, he examined the shroud in the 50s. He was a French physician. And he talked about how here is one of the major nerve centers in the human body, the median nerve. And with that nail through the base of the hands, that every time Christ moved on the cross, the pain would have been so extreme, causing someone almost to pass out. And why would Christ have to have moved on the shroud? Why?
To get air.
To get air, because if you hang in this position, after a few minutes, your muscles will go into spasm. You will be able to inhale, but not exhale because of the spasms. So he had to use his foot as a fulcrum to push himself up, and he did that for 3 hours, and we think the actual cause of death, either it was loss of blood because of the brutal scourging his blood was drained from his body. Actually, the side and the heart, the piercing, give evidence of this.
I found some. I just left my laptop.
Should be.
But what was I just saying?
The spear on the side.
Oh, yes. The blood and the water which flowed forth, it's actually medically accurate what likely happened to Christ if the blood was drained from his body. Because if the blood is drained from one's body, the ventricles of the heart then fill up with water. And when his side and likely his heart were pierced, that's why John describes blood and water flowing from his side. That would have been an accurate medical statement of the heart condition that was drained of blood. So Christ may have just bled to death, or a combination of bleeding to death and asphyxiation, because he could no longer lift himself. So that he asphyxiates, he dies of suffocation. Or another theory is, they have some evidence, Dr. Barbet, that it was a heart attack. Okay? That the heart just gave out, in other words. Okay? And that may have been from loss of blood too. So all these interesting facts about the shroud. But it's 5 after 12, we will stand and pray the Angelus. Okay? I'll end us here.